So, a quick introduction about Mr. Sharma. He comes with a lot of experience. He's an ex senior vice president of JSW Steel. He's also worked with Tata Steel. He's also been associated with DuPont for a significant amount of time. And he's also a recipient of the Deming Award. And he's one of the most passionate people when it comes to safety, which you will definitely see over the next 45 minutes. So without further ado, I would like to request Mr. Sharma to take the session forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanmay. Before I start, let me share the presentation first. And okay, so good evening, friends. Uh, I'm SS Sharma, like as Tanmay said, and I've seen the implementation of safety across large organizations, both in India and abroad. And to me, safety, especially in the eastern part of the world, which is Japan, South Korea, and also to some extent in Taiwan, safety is absolutely a different subject altogether. And they understand subject and they understand the safety in a different perspective altogether. So today, what we're going to do is we are going to look at safety, not into so much in procedures and not into so much of process safety and all that. But what I have seen is if you uh, do this IC process, which is basically an interaction, encouragement and engagement, and here is where what you find, this interaction, people have to interact, and then of course there is an engagement, and most important is encouragement. Now, if you're able to do this encouragement and engagement through an interaction, especially at all levels inside the organization, my belief is that you would get your levels of safety into a different standard. Now, before we actually begin, let me tell you a small story which actually happened in my lifetime. And this is way back about 50 years ago when I was probably in the 8th standard. And I studied from a school in Jamshedpur. And there was a colleague of my father who was an ITI. He was not an IIT, and he wanted his son to get into IIT. And poor fellow, he couldn't even know the difference between IIT and IIT. I'm talking about those days, but he wanted his son to get into the Institute of Technology. And therefore, from the 6th and the 7th standard itself, what he did was he used to coach his son. And by the time that report card used to come back, he used to look at the report card. And in the 6th and the 7th standard, he found that his maths, he was close to about 70%. Science, he had about 75%. And, other subjects also, he was in the 70s. And he came to know from his sources while he was working with the Tata Motors that having this type of percentage will not help you to get into IIT, even those days. So he and his wife got together and they said, let us do a little bit of coaching. So they went, the son went for an external coaching. And again, back in the 8th standard, he was so excited when the final results came out and the son comes running. And, he wanted to show the report card to the father. The father says, how much did you get in maths? So he said, I've got about 80. And how much did you get in science? So it's about 85. But somehow he did not agree and he did not believe in what the son was saying. So he took out the report card and he saw it under the light. In those days, one could actually do a little bit of, from 28, he can bring it to 82 because those days the report card was not a printed form. It was always written in the handwriting. And, many people used to do that. 28, you move the 2 and bring it to 8 and 2. So the fathers are happy, I'm happy, the teachers are happy. So what they used to call in those days, fudging. Uh, but again, the father was not very happy about it, and all his colleagues had said, no, the 80s also will not help you to get into IITs. So when in the 9th standard, he brought into a lot of coaching. He spent a lot of time with his children, and then he had a lot of motivation at home, a lot of positive atmosphere at home, and a lot of tuitions at home because he was an ITI. So all he could do was basically sit with his children and look at certain time. He brought a lot of discipline into his child. And at the end of the 9th standard, when the boy starts running at the end of the examination with his report card, the father asks, so how much did you get in maths? How much did you get in science? So he said, yeah, Dad, I've got about 92, and in science I'm close to about 88. But I know why I've got 88, but I could have got about 96. And so the father was a little happy, and he did see a lot of improvement. Again, he went back to his colleagues in Tata Motors and he said, "This is what my son is doing." But somehow the people around them told him, "No, even this percentage of marks will not help to get into mechanical branch, especially in IIT, because those days we had only about 5 or 6 branches, and mechanical happened to be one of the most topmost branch." So in the 10th standard, he put his all his best and a lot of tuitions, and the child started getting to know what the parents want, and he also came to know what he wants in life, and he knew that if you have to strike into IITs those days, you got to be very serious about your maths, science, and your subjects and your learnings. So and we were the first ICSE batch, incidentally. I'm talking about way back in 1975. And the results came, and the child runs again back to his house. And this time, the father asked, "Hey, how much did you get in maths, and how much did you get in science?" But this time, the son said, "No, no, Dad, you must see the report to yourself, because somehow I feel that you don't believe in what I'm saying, and therefore you look into the report card all the time. So please look at the report card." So the father, hesitantly looks at the report card, and here is the score: with 98 in maths, and close to about 98 in science, and he was very happy about it. And the end of the story is like he went into plus two in one of the southern states in Chennai, and thereafter he got into IIT Madras. And let me tell you this: that he was one of the first guys to, after finishing his engineering, he got into a big job in one of the world's largest oil refineries, and today he is one of the directors. So, friends, the moral of the story here is that to get anywhere you want, uh, you have to be, there has to be a lot of engagement. And this is the case where, the parents were engaged with the child, and there was a lot of engagement, and there was a lot of interaction, and, most important thing was a lot of encouragement was there, and therefore he made it to the top. So, and there was a lot of trust which was built in between the parents and the son. So just remember the story while we go along in the presentation. And of course, that's me. And let's get into the next slide. So what I'm going to talk about in the next 30 minutes is, the DuPont, which in my opinion, is one of the world's greatest organization where safety is concerned, and they are the ones who basically walk the talk. And I'm quite convinced with their culture and vision. And I've been to their uh, their main office in US, and we will look at the safe behavioral model. We're going to look at this engagement uh, through encouragement, and we'll also go to see the C intervention, which is safety, encouragement, and engagement. And we're going to practice a little bit of the C during in the last part of my presentation, and of course, then we'll go for the review. Now, a quick look at what DuPont is all about. Why are we talking about this particular place, what this particular industry called Dow DuPont? The vision of this particular company is that it is sustainable. It brings about sustainable solutions, and it talks about healthy life for people everywhere. It normally doesn't talk much about profits, bottom line, and things like that. But they are supposed to be the world's benchmark in terms of safety, and it figures out in the list of the first 500 listed companies. And the powder mill operation of DuPont started way back in 1802, and that is the time when they started. And it also talks about the first safety rules, once very well established and written, were all there in 1811. And of course, the statistics on safety was also showed in 1912. And one of the biggest belief of this particular organization, Dow DuPont, is that injuries are preventable. And they also believe on that safety is a line management responsibility. And if you look at the culture is that no employee may enter a mill under a member of the top management has personally operated it. So we know today DuPont it ranks about 35th in the world, and so that's how. And even in those days, this is the Brandywine River, and the gunpowder factory. Even at that point of time, in the way back in the 18th century, it always said that whenever you have an explosion in the gunpowder company, these outlets always was facing towards the river, and that is how the concern in terms of safety was. So, friends, just like Usain Bolt had to demonstrate that he's the fastest guy under the planet, and today, and I'm sure cricket is happening. I'm not sure what's happening to the cricket, but Kohli has to demonstrate. Each one has to demonstrate. If you were to show that you're an excellent person in your sports, for example, even Ronaldinho has to demonstrate in the case of football. So, I also believe that to get to any level of safety excellence, the organization, the people have to demonstrate. One just can't do just about talking, but demonstration is what the key word. That if you really want to get into the level of safety excellence at that point, at that level, the organization, the people, and everybody has to demonstrate. Let's look at the cultural bridge, and this is what is a very important slide. From where to what do we basically lead to? For example, when you look at a cultural shift from dependence, we shift to independence. Even the Bradley's curve also talks about the four different levels as to how do we become from dependent level to an independent level. Before we actually embark upon a safety culture, we basically talk about the systems, we talk about processes. But the moment when you get into a different levels of culture, you get into personal values. From external drive and discipline, the organization tends to become an internal driven organization, and the entire organization gets into a motivation mode. From following the rules, you change over to understanding the rules, and there's a huge difference between following and understanding. From measurements, you get into engagement. From checklists, you become self-activation. From good management, you actually turn out to be good leadership. And most important is from compliance. Like most of these ISO 9000 and other things talks about compliance. But if you look at the Malcolm Baldrige Award models, when you look at the EFQM model, they talk about the commitment. So that's how the shift is from one to the other. And when you're shifting on from one end to the other end, that's the time when you see a cultural change in the organization. According to what I have seen across the world, uh, basically to build about a culture in the organization, whether it's quality culture, whether they call it a safety culture, like what the Japanese call it, as a total quality management. And in the total quality management, they look at all aspects of the organization, right from HR to purchase to the quality aspects and the manufacturing, the dispatch and every supply chain management. People talk about that it has to have a total quality improvement all across. And therefore, across the organizations, people have felt that there are only three types of people who actually gets into in terms of approaches. The first one is a behavioral approach. What we have actually normally see in large organizations is if you do a great thing, you get a carrot, you get a promotion, you get increments, you get this and you get that. But if you don't follow the rules in the organizations, then you get a punishment. For example, I know that there are a lot of organizations in the country and also elsewhere that the safety becomes a condition for an employment. If you don't behave properly inside the organizations, you are not selected. And if you're found consistently that if you're not following the rules, you may be thrown out of the organization. So safety is an employment a condition. So whenever you are looking at this type of an approach, what we call it as a behavioral approach where we have a reward and punishment. The second type of approach is the cognitive approach where people start thinking. Before you do anything, you got to think. You got to keep all your life. You got to keep all your five senses clear. For example, you got to keep your eyes open. You got to keep your ears open. You got to be all your senses are open. So a lot of thinking process happens during this cognitive approach, and this is what basically leads to a good amount of culture. And so what we're going to talk about towards the end of this presentation is this cognitive approach, which basically does a lot of thinking. And the third most important thing is the social approach. Just because people do it, you have to do it. For example, in the case of a person goes to Singapore, you can't smoke, you can't have a chewing gum anywhere you want, you can't throw the chewing gum anywhere you want. And because the moment you're caught, you have to pay a fine of about, say, $100. And so there are things which you cannot do in certain areas. So therefore, you follow rules just because the others have to follow. For example, if you go to the Western countries, the first thing they do is buckle your seat belts, and you have to do it whether you like it or not. So whereas in the case in other countries, even in some of the places, even in India, people are not still used to wearing a seat belt. But the moment you go to any of these countries, in Singapore, you go to Japan, you go to South Korea, you go to US, you go to any place in Europe, the first thing is you got to do that. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you do things because other people have to do it, and the law basically abides by it. And therefore, that's the social approach. So, for a cultural change and a cultural shift, you have to have all the three approaches. That is a behavior approach, you need to be a cognitive approach, which means basically you do a lot of thinking. And of course, the social approach is also very, very important in order to get the culture moving in the organization. So, an integration of all the three is what is seen in an organization. Okay, now quickly look at some of the behavioral model, and you'll find when you look at the behavioral model, you normally plan and you do a lot of action. So that's what it happens. And when you are in the cognitive model, basically it talks about your senses. That means a lot of thought process has to know, and there is a lot of knowing which happens. That means basically when you're looking at the very common thing is like when you go to a party with your wife, the first thing the ladies, they are very very observant during the party. What they actually observe is other ladies' jewelries. They observe what they wear. I mean, in fact, the observation power is so high that even they observe the nail polish, and they also they relate the nail polish which they've had in the last party they've met. So therefore, this always has to be a change. So that is the observation power, for the ladies, and especially for the men. We know that they take only about 5 minutes to dress up for a party, and the first thing when they enter into any party, the first thing is they look at where are their friends. So where are maybe some alcohol, what is it that they need to eat. So the sense organs have to work, especially when you are in an organization and if you're into safety around, and that is exactly what we're going to talk about in the next 5 minutes. And then, of course, the social model, you have to look, you have to speak, and you have to listen. And and therefore, when you do a lot of looking around, when you do a lot of observations, especially when you go to another countries, you have to behave the way others behave. Like there's a great saying, like when you're in Rome, do as Romans do, is what the social model is all about. Now, quickly, the most important thing, we are coming to a topic which is called sensing. So, therefore, when you go inside the shop floor, when you go inside any organizations, or when you go on the roads, or when you go on a drive, the saying, the first thing is, this person who's going to be on has to be very sensible. So, especially when you go inside the organization, you go to see people who are unsafe, people who are not wearing the proper PPEs, and you got to be very, very well observant on the 5S. Like for example, the Japanese people, they stress a hell of a lot of things around 5S. And that's very, very fundamental. Therefore, cleanliness is very, very important inside the shop floor. They don't want anything to be littered, and it becomes their own responsibility. So, therefore, all the five senses they are always open inside the organization, and anytime when they are on the roads. For example, when you see a red light, you're always stop. You see an amber, you see a green light, it's only then you move. Whereas in India and other places like the ones which are attached to the our subcontinent, if you don't find a police guy there, so people have a tendency to move through, even if you see the red light on. And there are several examples. Even at the midnight at 1 o'clock, a Japanese guy looks at the red light, he stops. Whereas there are other natives of other countries, the red light at 1 o'clock makes no sense because there's no traffic and therefore moves on. So, the senses of people have to be on all the time. So, the sense of hearing, the sense of feeling, and the sense of hearing, and also the smell, the nose. Because when you're inside the shop floor, people have to smell gases, for example. I come from a very large manufacturing organization like the steel plant, where you have very hazardous gases, like you have the carbon monoxide gas, you got the sulfur dioxide gases, then you got ammonia, you got naphthalene, and so many gases. So therefore, your all your senses have to be absolutely, what we call in the organization is all your antenna, all the five senses. have to be tuned and has to be on. And this is when your senses are working, and all the fatalities which are reported, all the reportable cases which are reported, all the medical treatment cases which are reported. In my opinion, this is only about 10% of what is actually seen in the organization. So in an iceberg model, as DuPont calls it, like what you see, what you report, and all these, the hazards, what you see, or any reportable accidents you see, all the fatalities, what you see, is only 10%. But the mantra, the underlying statement is, how do we look at this 90%? And the 90% are all the near miss cases, the unsafe situations, the unsafe behaviors, the risk perceptions, the attitudes, the belief and the motive. And so, quickly, what we're going to do in the next 10 to 15 minutes is, how do we improve? And what is that mantra? And what is that 7 steps which DuPont or whoever, all these large organizations who excelled in safety, which actually caters to, is this 90%? Because this 90%, if you are able to solve, then you are moving towards a very high level of safety. So this is the iceberg model, and in a cultural shift, when organizations are moving from one level to another level, there is a huge shift from this 90%, and they start moving on to the iceberg. So the near misses are reported, the unsafe situations are looked at, the unsafe behaviors are looked at, the risk perceptions are monitored, the attitudes are seen, and there are a lot of belief in doing this. Okay, so quickly let's look at the observation versus inspection. But what is the difference between an observation and an inspection? And this is one of the most powerful tool. And so I'm now getting you to that mantra of observation. When you do observations on people, you do you are there is an interaction between people. And when you do an inspection, you basically inspect things. For example, if a maintenance person goes on to inspect a few things inside, he's been told to go and inspect the crane. So therefore, he goes and inspects at the crane. He looks at noise. He looks at lubrications and things like that level. So inspection means doesn't it, it has nothing to do with people, whereas an observation is something to do with people. And when you do an observation, there is an interaction. And an observation, when you do, is with everyone, whereas the inspection has to be done only by experts. That means a quality control guy having a background of metallurgy, if he's an expert on doing an inspection on steel or inspection on yes or no, it's only those guys could do it. Whereas observations can be done by any people. Like as I said, like the ladies when they go to a party, and otherwise also they're very very observant. And so when you do an observation, there are positive observations and there are negative observations. Whereas in the case of inspection, you always look at the negative part of it. Noise, for example. Hey, go and see why the noise is coming. Please go and see why that gas is leakage. This is all negative. Where in the case of observation, we look at positive first and then the negative, and that is exactly which we are going to do. Now, and then of course, there's a lot of documentation when we do an observation. There's a lot of follow-up in the case of observation. So this is a very small difference between observation and inspection. And why I'm talking about more about this is, now we are going to look at how this observation as a tool will bring about a change in the culture. Okay, so there are several categories of observation. And this again, as per Dow DuPont and others also. Like, reaction of the people is one observation. For example, when you go into a shop floor and you are the boss, and suddenly you'll find some of the workers running here and there, and because they're not wearing the helmet and they know that they're going to get rogered, if the boss sees you without a helmet or without a safety shoe or without a safety glass, they run. And I've seen in my life that people run to the toilet, this and that. So when you have certain observations of people, under such category is called the reaction of the people. That is how people react when they see their superiors and all that. The second category of observation, when you go inside the shop floor and you observe, the second is the position of the people. Many people, they have a tendency to sit under a broken chair or a broken a stool, or they sit down, or they go up to the working at heights. and they don't have helmets, and they are in a very peculiar position of. So therefore, such categories of observation, when you find when they are in a very awkward position, that observation can be categorized as the position of the people. Anything related to PPEs, for example, not wearing proper shoes and not wearing proper helmet, not wearing protective equipment in terms of ears, they're all categorized under clothing and personal protective equipment. Any tools and equipment, for example, you see a hammer which is not correct, you see a sling for lifting if you don't find it proper. So all that part of the observation is categorized under tools and equipment. And procedure is like, suppose if the procedure, there's no procedure, for example, throwing out wastes inside the organizations, or for example, when you look at the machine shop, everything is spilled across in the machine shop. So there are no procedures, there is no orderliness, there is no 5S, there is no cleanliness. So when you observe things like that, it falls under the category of procedures. And of course, there is a new subject which is coming on as ergonomics, in terms of sitting, in terms of postures. This is a very high level science which is now coming up, called ergonomics, which is because of the repeated motions and the musculoskeletal disorders because of various repetitive motions, and that part of an observation when you go inside or anywhere when you see such observations which can be categorized under the subject called ergonomics. Now, some of the benefits of the observation when you go down to do the observation, of course, it just prevents injuries. It prevents, property loss, and reinforces the positive safety behavior. Because when you do, and we're going to quickly look at the seven steps on observations, and if you do that, it's my belief and my last 30 odd years of experience that definitely I'm certain that it would prevent injuries. It establishes and understands standards. So, when you interact, you get to understand standards. For example, there are about 30 odd standards in the manufacturing industry, right? From working from height, or confined spaces, or all those standards. When you start questioning, you also learn and establish the correct standards. Of course, you identify the weaknesses, and you also look at some of the unsafe situations and the unsafe behaviors, and you try to rectify when you actually do the observations inside the people. And most important is, there is a lot of motivation you create, both to your peers as well as to your subordinates. And we'll quickly look at as to how this is done. Okay, now quickly, we are now into the seven steps. And friends, let me tell you this, that if you follow these seven steps, either in the organization or even your family life or with your friends, and I'm telling you a full guarantee that your life, your cultural shift will definitely would going to happen. And this I've seen. I've done this experiment. I've done this for the last 30 odd years. This is what basically is the underlying. No matter how many procedures you get into this, no matter what you do, but if you follow these seven steps consistently, and all the organization, the entire people do this, you will definitely find a huge amount of a change in the organization. So, when you go into an observation, the first thing is you need to stop at that particular place, and you need to be sensitive. For example, when you're even getting up on a mobike, and you're going for a work, all your five senses have to be has to be on. For example, the bike, the tires, do you have petrol? Do you have the correct helmet when you're wearing it? And you got to be really cool. So all these senses have to work before you actually get onto the bike. And let me tell you, people who are more sensible at any point of time, at any time when they go for work, they are more safer, they are more productive. So even when you go for an observation, the first thing is you have to understand is where are you, and you have to keep all your five antennas, open. The second thing is when you go for an observation, that means inside any plant, or when you are into an area where you basically belong to, if you see any unsafe act which is happening around, many people have a tendency to, to shout and call and, hey, don't do this, don't do that. And, people have a tendency to shout back to people like, why are you not wearing your helmets? Why is it that you're not wearing shoes? Why is it that you're not wearing goggles? Why is it that you're not wearing ear studs? Because it's a high noise area. So the first thing is, sensitize yourself. The second step is You got to stop him safely and you get them your attention. And the third step is, first of all, you need to encourage that guy. Maybe it's because, most of the cases, I'm sure some of you must have noticed that people who actually meet with an accident inside the organizations and are people of not a very high level education or not a very high level or well-to-do person or a very high level in the hierarchy, but it's always the workers and the contract laborers who basically succumb to injuries. So therefore, you have to be providing some encouragement, and you have to provide a lot of positive support, saying that whatever shoes he's wearing, you got to encourage him for whatever good things he has to happen. And I'm telling you, this even when you are with your family, even when with your children, don't jump into areas where they are negative. First, try to encourage them. Try to get them into your level of thinking. Try to say, "Okay, whatever little things what they're doing in life, encourage them." And then you must try to get into areas of improvement because you're the boss. You're getting into an observation, and then we must understand that that we are basically going to do some observation only to learn from those people, for people who have actually been seen as unsafe acts. And when you do the engagement, when you start asking questions, this is what happened between the father and the son story in that IIT case. There was a lot of engagement. The mother, the father, they were always asking questions as to how did you do in maths? And why is it that you're not doing so well in maths? Whom are you sitting with? What is the teacher? So do I have to go for the parents teachers meeting? So a lot of parents teachers meeting, the father used to go. He used to understand the concepts from the teacher. So there is a lot of engagement which has to happen because that fellow didn't get into IIT just because there was a little bit of tuition, because there's a lot of engagement. The father had to go do all that parents teachers meeting. So here also you have to interact with the people who've been found to work unsafe inside the organization. And most important is once you have this delivery, once you have this the conversation with these people, you need to agree upon a certain thing. And you must have seen in that story also, there was a lot of agreement between people. The story in the agreement was between the father and the son that you have to get into IIT and you have to get good marks, and therefore there's a lot of motivation, there's a lot of engagement into that story. And of course, listening is a very very important trait because many people who think that they're good listeners are not. And please understand that people who go up in rung in the ladder and become people who become CEOs, people who normally become great people in the organizations are fantastic listeners. And the seventh step is when you finish up the observations and you did find certain areas of the engagement, you must thank for whatever the time he has taken and all that, because it is then there is a bond between the two of them. So my point here is, if and of course it's very simple. When I'm talking to you in the last 2 minutes about the 7 steps, it's not so simple. It is not easy. It takes years and years. For example, I know in Tata Steel, having close to about 45 to 50,000 employees in that organization, and if you were to bring this change in culture and doing the 7 steps, it took about 4 to 5 years, and even then, it doesn't shift to a very large cultural change. But then, of course, it starts from the top management, and there are systems which has to be evolved. Procedures have to be evolved, standards have to be evolved, and many things like that. So therefore, these 7 steps are important. And normally in the training program in the safety, we take about close to the whole day to make them understand all these 7 steps. So let's quickly look at this photograph and see if all the 7 steps can be applied. Suppose if you are coming to an observation into this particular area, and you have seen two guys sitting on this, there are people, here, the people here, and there's a trench being built, and you'll find, one of these large excavators, trying to get this, and there is a dumper there. People are wearing helmets, yes, but so unsafe. So first of all, when you look at the 7 steps to be followed, you note the safe behavior. So don't jump into them. You stop this work, and the safe behaviors are, yes, people are wearing helmets, people are wearing shoes. I can see that, and of course there are some ladders, and of course there are areas of huge improvement. So first you note the safe behavior situations, and then you note the unsafe behavior. Unsafe behavior, I'm sure we can take out about 20, 25 unsafe behaviors and talk to these people and do that seventh step. The first step is sensitize yourself. Are you safe? The second step is basically to stop the work. The third step, you have an engagement. Fourth step, you have to do a little bit of agreement. Also, the step is on to listen to any other issues. So if you follow the seven steps, you will definitely bring about a huge amount of change in this area of work. Number one. Number two, you will bring about a motivation too. And the third most important thing is you're driving a culture. You cannot expect this type of people sitting on in an organization. So let's look at another figure like this. This is all live figures, friends. This is not an animation figure. This is what you'll also find many areas having like this. Look at this guy who's the dumper, and he's standing there. There are many areas where there's a lot of improvement. The guy's not wearing the helmet. This fellow's under this. It might come off anytime. The trucks, the tires are not choked, and and this guy, anything can happen to this area. So therefore, there's a lot of risks this person is undergoing through. So when you find certain observation like this, the first thing you need to do is you first bring him down, you get him into safe area, you talk to him, you get him some of the positive areas, then you look at the positive areas, and he himself will tell you all the areas of improvement. And finally, he will, also ask you to do many things in life, and therefore that's how the connection happens. So this is in a very nutshell about the seven steps to be followed. And all large organizations I've seen all across the world, whether it's Nippon Steel or JFE, or you talk about any of the automobile industries, this observation power, noting down the observation, having reviews on the observations, finding out what the unsafe situations are, looking at what the unsafe behaviors are, becomes, and you bring all the that 90% which you find inside that iceberg model, you bring it onto the top, all the near miss incidents you discuss. And in my opinion and my belief is, like, when you do this interaction through the seven steps and you bring in a lot of encouragement and engagement, your level of safety will definitely go up. Some of the benefits of the safety through engagement and encouragement, of course, you understand some of the standards, you raise the safety awareness, you bring positive safety behavior, you identify and correct the unsafe situations, you assess the compliance with standards. Most important is you definitely motivate people. And I am very sure, and I'm very clear on this based on my so many years of experience. And my belief is that you will prevent injuries and, of course, the property loss. Now, once you do the observation, of course, I'm saying, it's very easy to explain to you in 2 minutes, but of course, it takes about, as I said, 3 to 4 years before you actually operate all this. How to keep it alive is, you have to review all the progress meetings. You've got to be reporting all the near miss incidents and the accidents. And of course, there has to be a system by which you should be able to, actually get everything, in your way of work. So I come to an end of my presentation, and I must thank each one of you to have a very patience hearing. And so this is what my belief is, that if you do observations inside an organizations, and you will be able to get it. And as I've said, this was only about a 30 to 35 minutes talk, and professionals take close to about 3 days to make people understand what this observation technique is. They run you through a whole lot of slides as to how you build in cultures, as to where you are, where you want to go. That gap is seen, and people look at the gap in a different perspective. And so that's what it is. And this is basically a tip of the iceberg. So as I've said, if you are interested to get into the trainers program, we have the capability to train people on this behavioral aspect, and a cultural shift. The training program normally is about for 6 days. 2.5 to 3 days, we give you the content, we make you understand what the content is all about. And then we also make you present, and during the presentation, for people like us, we look at the content delivery, we look at your delivery styles, and most important is, have you understood the concept of this particular thing, which you can always train other people in the organization. And this is how the model works. we train close to about 25 to 30 people, or maybe a set of about some people, and they themselves train in the organization about this behavioral change, about the cultural change through the 7 step process. So, thank you. I come to an end of my presentation here. And so, if you have any questions, we can take questions. Yeah, Janvi, or
Yes, sir.
yeah, if anybody has questions, I don't know, I'm not sure if anything is on the chat box. If somebody, if you can, or you can raise your hand, or you can see in the chat box any questions. Janvi, you can help me out if there are any
Yes,
questions
sir.
there.
I don't see any messages yet.
Mhm. Yeah, Durshit, Vinod, Rajesh, I can see there. Any questions? Imam, Zanzul, Islam. Any questions on the 7 steps, or any questions on this methodology of adopting? You believe, you don't believe, you have your views.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, MS.
Actually, we also follow some similar kind of approach for addressing unsafe acts, where we call it safe unsafe act.
Yeah.
The challenge that we see it here is, although we do follow positive approach in the starting, then tell them about what are the things that they are not following correctly, and they agree to correct it. But many times it happens that same people will start, will repeat the same things,
Mm.
and either we are not able to understand, in the sense, are we able to make them understand? Because at the point of discussion they agree to this point, and also they say that yeah, it is risky, we will not do, we will not repeat, but
Mm.
things keep on repeating. We don't know how to address them.
Murthy, I've understood
This
your
is the major
question.
challenge that we are seeing.
Absolutely. Murthy, I understood your questions. Again, in my story, I'll tell you way back in my story, many people tried to get their children to IIT, but this particular person made it through. So what happens during this observation is you are right. In my opinion, the 7 steps, there must have been a lack. When the 7 step is agreement, and I have seen and I've done. There are tears which is rolled into the eyes of the person who does the unsafe act and is caught. I mean, when this happens, when such connect takes place both from body, mind, and soul, it will happen that this guy has to change. But if there is a little superficial way of doing this, following the 7 steps, if there's a little bit of superficial way that the actions are not taken. For example, I'll tell you, this particular poor contractor or a worker, if you wanted a broken chair, and if you have done nothing about it, he wants good lighting in his office or in the area of work. If you have done nothing about it, there are a lot of scrap which is falling, and if you have done nothing about it, the seriousness in the 7 step has been lost. The point I'm trying to make is just like that IIT student, the ITI father got his son into IIT, there's huge amount of seriousness. There's a top level approach. There are systematic, way of the documentation, and there was a systematic amount of interaction, huge amount of interaction on a daily basis, huge amount of encouragement, and I'm sure whether whoever it is, you will find an improvement. I think there is a little lack in the areas where people are a little serious. And I know, Murthy, to start with, it happens that way. But when you bring in a little bit of force right from the top management, when you foster involvement, when you become a role model yourself, things will definitely improve, Murthy garu. 100%. And therefore, we are there. I mean, I don't know which industry you represent, but I have seen great, huge amount of success. Provided people are serious, provided people know what they're doing, provided there is a vision in the organization. Everybody is doing it with a positive mind, with that Josh in mind. That yes, we have to get into the, we have to become Ronaldinho, we have to become Usain Bolt, we have to become Sachin Tendulkar, or today Kohli. I don't know what he's done today, but so things like that. If there's a will, that has to happen. If you have to get to level of that safety, you have to demonstrate, as I said. But yes, initially you will have issues like this. But yeah, you convinced? I know takes time. It takes about 3 to 4 years before you actually bring the entire organization to that level of thinking. Yeah. Any other questions?
Hello, sir. There is a question in the chat box.
What did you say?
If any old person repeatedly violating the safety rules, what can we do?
Perfect. So there is, in safety, there's nothing called old, there's nothing called young. I've seen, for example, Cyrus Mystery, a very young guy, about 51, 52. People consider but he was a very young guy just because he was not wearing the seat belt. Of course, we are not saying about much about the crash, but the other two people survived. The other two people got off because of. So then in safety, there's nothing called no, there's nothing called yeah. The same old person who's about 64 years, if he is sent to Singapore, and if he's a very chained smoker, and if you tell him in Singapore you're fined about $100 the moment you're caught in smoking, the old man forgets smoking throughout his life. The point I'm trying to make is in safety, especially inside the work, there's nothing called old, there's nothing called new. Yes, some old people carry a legacy of, lethargy. They carry saying, oh my God, I've been working in this organization for the last 30 years and nothing can happen to me and I'm a very safe worker. For last, many comments like this happen. I've been in this organization for the last 40 years. It's very close to retirement. And nothing happened to me. So what are you talking about? And let me tell you a small live example. In Bhilai Steel Plant, just about 6 months ago, there was a guy who was retiring 1 month before. Very highly unsafe guy. The guy used to go on a mobike across the blast furnaces without his helmet and all that. One fine evening at about 6 o'clock, when he was going through the blast furnace, there were splinters of that iron ore. It fell into his mobike and the mobike exploded, and this guy didn't return home at all. 1 month before retirement. So the point I'm trying to make is there is nothing called old, there's nothing called new. Everybody has to come into the observation here. Everybody has to follow rules. Everybody has to follow safety till he goes back home. But yes, the treatment has to be done equally, whether it's young, whether it's old. The 7-step process has to be taken place across the organization. I know there are challenges. Some of the people who are much senior to you would say, hey, I've been there for the last 40 years. Nothing happens to me. I've got another 1 month of, retirement. So, you please tell all these sermons to the young fellows. I told you one example. This fellow never returned home 1 month before the retirement because, he was so confident that nothing would happen to him. But, he went from vertical, he went horizontal, back home, never came back to work again the next day. So it can happen to anybody, anytime, any place.
There's a follow-up question, sir. When top level officer is not maintaining safety, in that time, what can we do?
Very important. See, safety, just like quality, just like improvement, just like production, just like account, just like profit, it has to start from the top. If the top guys don't believe it, if the top management doesn't believe it, very difficult to get the culture going through. And it's very pathetic. It's very sad that there are people in the bottom rung of the ladder. They want to improve. They want to do many things, but they are overshadowed. They are they are covered up. And the top man, hey, nothing doing it. Chalo, chalo, jaldi karo. I am there to support. When you have this type of culture, the culture is more on the behavioral culture. They're not into the cognitive or they're not into the social approach culture. Such organizations, in my opinion, will be the same. They will have fatalities, they will have all that. And of course, at one point of time, about 5, 6 years ago, about 10 years ago, the Factories Act and all was a little simple. But today, the factory inspector or the guy who's supposed to be the head of the organization can go behind the bars if he's consistently found not following the safety rules, not following all that. So I'll tell you about an example. In my last organizer, senior vice president, he lost his job just because this guy was so inconsistent in safety. So the boss, the MD of the company said, hey, nothing doing, man. You don't seem to be following safety. This guy was a very fantastic guy. He was very high on the rung of the ladder. He got a lot of promotions, but the moment when he found the second fatality in his organization, the MD said, thank you very much, sir. You have to leave tomorrow. Such are the norms which are coming in large organizations. today. So safety is now considered to be very, 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 very serious. And the years to come, it's going to be one of the most pivotal roles. And all these technical institutes, for example, IITs, the Adanis, the Ambanis, all these guys are now the first thing what they look at before they buy any industry is their safety performance. First thing, because the culture in that organization. Yeah. Any other questions? Durushati, Vinod, any
Anytime
questions?
during
Yeah.
conversation, PCs are one of the major target areas for everyone. They easily observe PCA observation. Maybe they don't give that much importance to procedures and etc. So how do you address this particular point?
Correct. So your question was not very clear, but you are saying the procedures are not there, it is not followed. The standard operating procedure, the standard maintenance procedures are there, but they don't follow, and therefore they have these near misses and incidents and accidents. So if you're talking about that,
Sorry,
yeah,
sorry. My question was there are various categories of observations.
correct.
So in that, for everyone, easy target observations are around PPEs. So many observations are getting reported only against PPEs, not
Mm.
procedures or tools and equipment. So there are other major focus areas that needs to be looked at.
Correct, correct.
That often gets missed out.
You're right, you're right. Because safety in most of the organizations is only about shoes. It's only about safety helmet, it's only about wearing eye goggles. Is wearing only no. One observation, that's for the sixth observation. The first observation is orderliness, procedures. Do you have the correct procedures? So when you don't have the procedures and if they are following it and they are not following it, that observation falls under that category. If repeated postures, if this particular person is not, it falls in ergonomics. When you start running people, it's all there. When you look at 5S, the neatness, the cleanliness is again part of procedures and orderliness. PPE is just one part of it, and you're right. most people think that if I wear a safety, मैंने goggles पहन लिया, मैंने आई पहन लिया, मैंने शर्ट पहन लिया, मैं जूता पहन लिया, बॉस मैं तो बहुत safe है. Sorry, that's only 1/5 part of it. Procedures, you're right. Are they following the procedures? Are there revisions of procedures? Who's writing the procedures? Do we have
Excuse
visuals?
me, sir.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt, but we only have, I wanted to remind you that there's only 4 minutes left for the meeting,
yeah,
and we
perfect.
also have another, yes,
Yes,
question in the chat box. If you could
yeah,
address that after completing this.
yeah. So
Thank
what is the next question?
How to avoid the horseplay behavior?
What do you mean by horseplay? Who's the one who's answered question this?
Tulshidas Raskar.
Yeah.
Yes, manipulation of system and
Ah. Yeah, yeah. So manipulation again,
safety
culture.
instrument bypass.
Yeah, I know.
Safety
It's all culture. It's
instrument
all culture. Culture.
interlocking system bypass.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree. I know what you're saying. Lotto system, for example, lock and tag out systems. You bypass the main system, the level two system, the level one system in order to get it faster and faster going. It's that is not culture. When you build in observations, when you build in this program, and when there's a lot of review and the seriousness in the top organization that you have to do it without this, it happens that way. The culture builds in from the top organization. And you're right. No shortcuts to safety, boss. Level one, level two, all information system. I've seen a lot of people doing bypassing. Not allowed in a great cultural organization. Not allowed in an area where you are supposed to be improving safety.
Basically, it's
It's all,
come under cultural
it's all
organization.
culture. It's all culture. You're right. The boss allows you to do it, therefore you do it. His boss allows you to do it, therefore these guys. So the cultural makeshift shortcuts, bypass. Don't put a plug. Put that. The straight, the three wires going in. Don't use mask. अरे चलेगा चलने the production. We want production. No. It doesn't happen in good organizations.
Okay, clear.
Yeah. Okay, Rachita, yours, all yours.
So, like, if people have any other questions, like, we can extend the meeting for 5 more minutes. So, if anybody has any questions, the Floor is all yours. You can please feel free to ask. If there are, any more questions for Sharma sir.
But all I can tell some of the friends who have been sitting here is like, Safety Connect today has the capability of taking these tasks, of getting into your organization, studying as to where you are. They will also study as to where you want to go. They will also have a feel. We got about 22 parameters on which we actually do the study. The as is what they call is an as is study as to where you are. And we'll rate you where you are. And then, we also promise you that if you follow some of our techniques, we can take you to a different level. We will give you a lot of good training and, all world class DuPont and Dow training for the top level people, to the mid level people, to the bottom level people, in terms of the form of pyramid. We will also to see if an organization and safety can be built in. We will advise people to, follow certain rules and regulations. And I'm sure we can become a part of your cultural shift. And that is how now it's now becoming an end thing these days. And we can also give you some good standard practices. We can show you some world good practices which you can follow. We can also, suggest for you to go to some industries where you actually see all this, and then come back and try to bring a big amount of change. So the Safety Connect today, with me and the other colleagues of mine, we do have the capability of doing this. So good. If you have no more questions, so thank you very much. Uh, yeah, so I can see. Yeah, so thank you very much for your time and for your patience. Rest assured that if you follow the 7 steps religiously and if you walk the talk in an organization, you can bring a change in your organization. And please be free to connect with us, and we would be grateful to give any training or training the trainer sessions for your organizations. So thank you, and thank you one and all. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Yeah, Rishita, all done?
Yes, sir. I think if there's not any more questions, we can wrap this up. I would, from Safety Connect's behalf, I would like to thank everybody for, giving their time and making this webinar a success. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best. Be safe.